So welcome everyone to Lowe Connects. This is our signature virtual program that grew out of the necessity of COVID, but it's become now a staple of our offerings that allows us to reach a wider audience of participants that are local, national, and global. My name is Mark Osterman. I'm the Director of Technology and Engagement here at the Lowe Art Museum. And I'm joined tonight by artist Donna Davis, professor and Arresti Chair Amy Zane at the University of Miami, and Professor Stephen Allison from the University of California, Irvine. Tonight's program is titled Decompose, Exploring the Intersections Between Art and Science. And I'll just give a little background and context to that. So Decompose presents creative outcomes from Donna Davis's long-term artist residency with the Wood, Termite, and Fungi International Research Project, led by the University of Miami. The project examines the role of termites and microbes in decomposing tropical wood and produces modeling that predicts related impacts of rising temperatures, contributing to the global climate change models. Davis's artworks have evolved from field trips, research, conversations, and interactions with the research team, from which she produces multi-layered works, weaving project information into imaginative digital pieces that engender a wider consideration of the interconnectedness of all life. And so after our discussion, we'll have a chance to experience a virtual exhibition that we put together and that anyone can access on their own time. Before moving on, I just want to cover one or two other points here, a little housekeeping for everyone. So for questions, please type in the Q&A, and there'll be time at the end where we'll address the audience's questions and comments. If you need closed caption, please just click on the CC icon most likely at the bottom or top of your screen. And at the end of tonight's program, you'll be prompted to fill out a survey, which we hope you'll take the time to do. The Lowe Art Museum utilizes this for reflective practice to continue effectuating better programming and learning about what type of programming our audiences would like to experience. Sorry. I just wanted to give a little information about upcoming programs at the Lowe Art Museum as well. So tomorrow evening, we have Complete and Perfect Truths, 200 Years of British Watercolors from the collection of BNY Mellon. So we have an opening to the public from 7 to 9 p.m. You can register for that program if you go to Lowe's website and go to our events page. This Saturday, we have a family art workshop from 10 to 11:30 a.m. That workshop's inspired by the work of Alex Tremino, who is a visiting artist who has an art installation currently up at the Lowe Art Museum. And then lastly, next Thursday, we are opening the exhibition Charles White, A Little Higher, and that's also from 7 to 9. You can get detailed information about all this programming, again, by going to our website and our events page, and you're encouraged to come to these events. They are all free. So lastly, and then I will get out of the way, I just wanted to give a little context why we're doing this, one of many reasons. So the Lowe and the intersection of art and science. When we think about art and science, they have much in common and cause us to reflect, explore, and communicate aspects of the world around us. As an academic museum, the Lowe has opportunities to collaborate with faculty and students across disciplines, and that's how this came about, which was through an informal conversation I had with Professor Zane that turned into a really wonderful collaborative project with this virtual exhibition as also an outcome. And so it's this interdisciplinary approach to engagement that enhances the impact and value of our collection and programs for those we serve. And we really like to utilize the collection at the Lowe in that interdisciplinary way. And then lastly, the Lowe has had years of exploring the intersection of arts, health, and well-being. So we have programs such as the Art of Mindfulness and Fine Art of Healthcare that integrate art into a variety of healthcare and community settings for therapeutic, educational, professional development, and creative purposes. And so this kind of interdisciplinary project really falls into that world of ours and that mission with the Lowe. So without further ado, I'll do quick intros and then be done with it and hand it over to Donna. So I just want to do these quick backgrounds on our panelists. So Donna Davis, our artist, Donna Davis is a multidisciplinary artist intrigued with the idea of connection. Her work explores intersections between art and science with a particular focus on natural and social ecosystems. Often collaborating with ecologists, botanists, and mycologists, Donna explores new ways of creatively interpret ecological data, working across sculpture, assemblage, installation, and digital media to create works that consider imagined futures and provide sites of environmental observation. By providing new ways of seeing, Donna aims to challenge ecological discourse and empower stewardship of our fragile ecosystems. Professor and Arresti Chair Amy Zane from the University of Miami. Amy works at the crossroads of plant ecology, physiology, and evolutionary biology. Amy's research lab is currently looking at plant afterlives, the ways dead trees release stored carbon. Her team received a 5-year grant to study how termites and microbes compete to break down tropical wood in Australia and how that impacts the stored carbon. And lastly, Professor Stephen Allison from the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Allison is a professor of ecology, holds a PhD in biological sciences from Stanford University. As part of the University of California's Carbon Neutrality Initiative, Dr. Allison was named the UC Irvine Climate Action Champion 2016. He teaches ecosystem ecology and directs the Ridge to Reef Graduate Training Program, an interdisciplinary program focused on skills development for students pursuing careers in environmental fields. His research addresses the resilience of microbial communities to drought and the effect of rapid climate change on carbon losses from Southern California ecosystems. Dr. Allison is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and editor-in-chief at the interdisciplinary journal Elementa, Science of the Anthropocene. Since 2021, he served as a member of the Green Ribbon Environmental Committee for the City of Irvine and director of UC Irvine's Newkirk Center for Science and Society. So thank you all for joining me. And thank you for the participants who are joining this program. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Donna. And Donna, just cue me as you're ready to go to next slides, okay?
Oh, thank you, Mark. And thank you for the introductions. And thank you, Amy and Steve, for joining today and all the people who have joined us here today. So first of all, I suppose it'd be really good, Amy, could I just get you to give us a bit of a brief overview of the research project?
Very happy to. Thanks, Donna, and thanks, Mark, for the introduction, and a pleasure to have everybody here joining us to hear about our research and our collaborations across science and art. So this has been a really interesting project for me to be working on. Wood is one of the largest biological stores of carbon on the planet. And I've been really interested for a long time in how plants are constructed for life. But then what I became interested in is the plant afterlife, basically how that construction for where plants are able to live around the world affects how they decay and release carbon back to the atmosphere. And so what this has meant is that I start looking at the organisms that are actually doing the decay business. So these are I've especially looked at the living decayers, such as microbes globally, so largely fungi, but also bacteria. But in the tropics, termites have a huge role, especially in the dry tropics. And so what we were able to do is go to Queensland, Australia, and go to wet and dry tropical places and think about this. We have sites that go from rainforest to savanna, and we look at the rates of decay and the forms of carbon that get released across the rainfall gradient and across seasons through time. And what we expect is that the relative role of termites becomes relatively more important in dry seasons and in dry sites. And so what's interesting is that the wood is storing carbon, and these organisms are releasing CO2 just like we do when we respire, but the termites can also be releasing methane. So you think of, they're sort of like little cows, and that cows fart and release methane. Termites do this too, and methane is a 30-fold worse greenhouse gas. And so understanding the rates at which they're releasing these different gases gives us some insight into how those interactions between the decayers and wood affect global change. So we're trying to understand this by doing some modeling and future climate scenarios that I think Steve will talk a little bit about. So in the process, we're measuring things like the amount of biomass in the landscape, how fast wood rots, collecting termites, collecting fungi, and measuring greenhouse gases.
Thank you, Amy. And Steve, Mark, if we can move on to the next slide. And Steve, are you able to give us a bit of an overview as well?
Sure. I think Amy covered a lot of the key concepts of the project we're working on. I did want to thank Mark and you, Donna, for hosting us here, and it's really exciting to be involved in this kind of project and discussion about our last 5 years of research in this really fascinating part of Northern Australia. My part in the project is a little bit more specific to how the microorganisms like the fungi that Amy just mentioned are actually going about their job of taking apart wood. And I think about the microbes as having almost like a pair of scissors that are going and chopping apart the wood at a molecular level. And we're using chemical assays in a laboratory to understand how the fungi are doing that. So we're assaying the activities of enzymes that are produced in the wood. And you can see in the images here some of the vials of sawdust that we analyze and really get at the heart of how microbes can take a solid log and turn it into mush. That's basically what we're interested in. And then we're also interested in the larger scale. So thinking globally about the implications of these very small scale processes. So to do that, we develop mathematical models, we run on computers, we take the knowledge that we're gaining from the field sites, from the laboratory, and try to integrate it into equations and formulas that we can then run and hopefully make better predictions about how the climate will change and how the ecosystems will change in terms of the carbon that they're storing in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And if we can move on to the next slide. And so, Amy, why did you decide that you wanted to have an artist on the project?
Great question. So I think for anybody not familiar with our funding comes from the National Science Foundation and NERC. So this is the US and UK main funding agencies for science. And one of the things that NSF asks us to do is to come up with broader impacts, in which we're trying to think about how advancing science can also benefit society. So we do various education and outreach. And so originally Steve and I for the grant had put in something that was sort of bog standard, where we're talking to stakeholders. And I happened to be over in Australia starting to set up the project. And, thinking about how scientists are conveying our findings, we often really struggle with how we do this conveying to bigger and broader audiences. And we often we don't reach very many people. So I happened to be over in Australia in 28, and this is in Cairns, and I was staying near the Botanic Garden. And so I went to this art exhibit that was on Aboriginal basket weaving. And I heard these tantalizing words around the corner that were things like trees, fungi, mycorrhizae, which are the organisms that help plants to take up nutrients. And I started edging closer and closer and closer, feeling like I was intruding. And I turned the corner, and there was this amazing display of all of these soft sculptures of fungi and whirligig things that you could move to look at the life cycle of plants, and silk screens with gorgeous prints of spore prints. And she had, Donna was there talking with this mycologist, and she had this captive audience asking all of these amazing questions, because she could convey in these very visual ways this information that I I try to describe, and it sounds much more flat. And so I think by being able to leverage off of Donna's beautiful work, and here you can see where she's projected onto a cathedral one of her images that has the fungal hyphae and the plants in the middle, that she helps to translate our scientific findings into a compelling artwork using these different media. So she used, for that exhibit, she used a lot of three things that you could interact with. For us, because a lot of what we did was across COVID, this has been virtual, and that's one of the delights of today, is that she has these amazing images and videos and sounds that she was able to put together. And so I think it helps us to think about speaking in different ways to audiences, and to talk to many more people than we usually would.
Thanks, Amy. And so, Steve, did you have any expectations of what I would bring to the project?
Well, I didn't know you as well as Amy did before the project. So I guess at some level, my expectations were fairly limited, because I'd never worked with an artist in this way before. And honestly, many of these projects, it's really a challenge to have a broader impact. And like Amy was saying, think about ways that we can connect our work to broader publics. So, I was encouraged and I thought it was exciting. I was maybe a little bit apprehensive, not sure how it would go and not sure what would be involved, but I'm certainly open to creative ideas. And I'm a visual person, like a visual learner. And I thought that sounded like a great idea for a collaboration and a way to implement the broader impacts in our project.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that that's really interesting, Steve, is that that idea of expectations, because I think also going into the project, I wasn't sure what to expect with working with such an international collaborative project and how that was all going to work. And also this project does cover such diverse like research teams talking about the microbes, the fungi and the termites. So my sort of expectations were a bit like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. So of course, I get to go out in the field with you guys and also get to be in the lab and also, chat via email and via Zoom, which is, fantastic for me as an artist. And you can see here on some of the slides, some of my visits out in the field, the size of the team that you can see up in the top left-hand corner there. We started the project before COVID, so I did get to go on the very first field trip, which was really interesting. And I suppose I really got to see a lot of the inner workings of the project. You can see up in some of the top right-hand images, I'm standing there with a drill, and we're in the lab with all of this hardware tooling equipment. We were drilling out these timber logs which had been collecting the sawdust, as Steve had mentioned earlier, to run assays on. And just that process was really, really interesting as an artist, because as an artist, I am very hands-on and very visual. And previously, before I had gone on the first field research site, I had read a few of the background papers, and certainly being in the field, talking to the scientists, working with my hands, looking at amazing landscapes was a really, really rich experience for me. So and that was the very start of these ideas of what artworks could I possibly even begin to create. So super exciting as an artist being invited into this world. So Amy, Mark, if we can move to the next slide. Amy, why do you think interdisciplinary collaborations are important, and how do they enhance the science? What are some of the benefits that you see?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Donna. And so I think each of our disciplines has various tools that we use to address whatever we're trying to work on. And I think what's fun with interdisciplinary work is that you can start drawing from the skill sets and the knowledge base and the tools that different disciplines have. And so it's really fun to have these interdisciplinary sorts of projects, and you can start asking novel questions by making use of these different tools. And so what's been fun with Donna too is that because she's coming from outside my discipline, when she joins me, she's asking questions that really stop and make me think. So she makes me scope out, there I am, like doing something very specific. And so I can think of like when I was what we call pipetters. We're moving liquids onto sawdust to try to preserve the microbes in there so that I can, do things like ship them off for sequencing or send them off to Steve. And so Donna would say, well, what's in that too? Why are you doing that? And I had to stop and think about scoping out from the minutia up to the big of, okay, well, this is what this does. This is why this does this. And this is what it's going to let us address. And so I was constantly rethinking, how does this fit into the bigger picture of my science with those interactions, which I think helped to keep me on track with the science questions specifically that it had. And so I think, that was really fun throughout that creative process with her. I also like to see how she approached the broader impact, or the broader audiences versus what I would do. So thinking about what she picked up, how the different microbes interacted, or, here you can see this amazing image with all these termite heads sticking out from foliage. And so you have the termites with the wood there. And so this is part of our projects, but not something I wouldn't have thought to portray it this way. And so I love seeing how that gets represented. And I think, one of the examples, and I think we end up with these different views and these different interpretations. So one of them that I really liked was I kept seeing Donna having these termites with this like cloud formation. And so for me, I was like, oh, I think, she's trying, for that, what she's thinking about is the rainfall gradient. It's this cloud of rainfall. And she happened to be driving past one of the sugarcane fields en route to our field site. And for her, it was about the gas emissions. And so we had this amazing intersection of discussions about what did this evoke? What did it mean in her head? What did it mean in my head, and why? And I think that for Steve and Donna and others in our project throughout, she'd give us an image and we'd sort of think through what did this mean for our project. So I really enjoyed that process.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And if we can move on to the next slide, Mark. And yeah, totally, I agree, Amy. And it's this idea of questioning and being able to, the way I learn as an artist is similar to what Steve had said earlier. If you can hit play, Mark, that would be great. Yeah, so I'm a visual learner. And so I learn through the creative process. So I'm learning, as I mentioned earlier, learning through the field trips, learning through the lab visits, learning through asking questions, and sometimes working out what question it is you want to ask is really tricky. And so having these really long-term, long-invested artist residencies allow those questions to form. So on the very first field trip, the questions I was asking was very different to the questions I was asking 4 years later at our final, research field trip. And so for me, I'm not only questioning the science from the scientists, I'm also asking questions of myself, because, this whole project's, talking about how these organisms feed back into the decomposition cycle, which feeds back in, obviously, into the carbon cycle, and how that is going to impact climate change. So whilst we're looking, with a microscope on these little organisms, I'm also looking at me, like at what role do I play within this, within the system. And so as I'm creating new artworks, I'm trying to reflect on my role. What do I think about the science? What do I think about climate change? How can I tell this story? What have I learned? And I think one of the really interesting things from this type of collaboration in a way to tell stories about climate change is, sorry, we did see that little video a second earlier, was to sort of put different objects or different themes together to talk about our role as humans within this system. And so the image that we saw before, which was called Reap, which had this lovely little piece of equipment that perhaps you'd often see in galleries, is an object that measures humidity and temperature for gallery collections. And alongside it, we've got some living flora. And, so I'm sort of thinking, why is it we're so good at preserving and conserving the human artifact? How invested are we at conserving, the artifact in which we lived, planet Earth? How much are we invested in changing the and monitoring the climate that we live in? So that was sort of just really trying to do a bit of a showcase between human and non-human, and how we see the human and non-human world, and how we see status and levels and hierarchies and things like that. So I kind of feel like art can sort of act as a way of interpreting how we think, and to evoke some curiosity, to evoke some empathy, to evoke thought, to again ask those questions. So perhaps allowing art to be a gateway or an alternate viewing platform to view the science, I guess. that was a bit of a long-winded explanation for that, wasn't it? I'm sorry, guys. So let's talk about some of the other artworks in the exhibition, and we might start with start with Steve, and we can see up on the screen, this work is called Decompose 2. It's a single channel video with an audio that was created by Luke Lickfold. And I just thought I'd ask Steve, look, how do you see your research in the artworks? And can you talk about this work? We might let it just play with a little bit of sound just for a couple of seconds, and then we'll switch on to Steve to talk about that.
I'm not hearing the sound, so I'll comment on it. And if the sound comes in, then we can listen to it for a moment. I think this is really interesting artwork, and it really captivated my imagination because of the kaleidoscope format. And, you know, a kaleidoscope is something that brings together different images into an organized way, in a way that has structure and meaning and beauty. And I think about it as very analogous to an ecosystem, you know, to the living and the non-living parts. You know, we're studying deadwood, so some of the non-living parts, but also the living microbes and termites that process that wood. And, you know, the kaleidoscope is sort of an analogy for those connections and the way that they're organized and the way that they cycle through. So you can kind of see the artwork cycling through these different components and colors. And that's really how I think about, say, the carbon cycle, right? There's living components and non-living components, the CO2, carbon dioxide gas that's coming off. And I think in each of these specific frames of the kaleidoscope artwork in Decompose 2, you know, you're seeing images of those parts of the ecosystem that we're measuring in the laboratory, we've gone out and found in the field in a termite mound. And it brings it all together. And the soundtrack is also really fascinating because it puts a sound, like a sensory component, to these ecological factors that we don't associate with sound normally, right? I don't know what a microbe sounds like when it's chewing on a piece of wood, but this gives my brain something to latch onto. And it was really fun to discuss with Donna about what would those sounds be. And, you know, we had words like slurping and sucking and, you know, juicing and things like that, which were really captured well, and I think complement the visual component here.
Yeah, I like that, Steve. And there was that lots of toing and froing about, you know, sounds. And I think I headed my question with, you know, what sound would the microbe make? And it was really great to hear back from all of the team as to, what audio they would put with it. And then it was lovely to actually, you know, get that soundtrack back and to sort of go, sounds kind of right, doesn't it? Fascinating to work with you guys on that. And also we'll talk a little bit later about some of those how we got to the imagery of the microbes as well. So look, Amy, would you be able to maybe talk through, and I might get Mark to flick to the next slide and play the next one. So the next work is called Decadence or Decadence. And this work here, like, Amy, if we go back to the other slide, Mark, sorry, just the one before. Yeah, that one. So Amy, if we can talk a bit about this work, we'll watch this work play in a minute, but I thought we'd just stop at this slide just to talk about the work and how you see your research visualized in this particular artwork.
Great. Yeah, very happy to, Donna. Yeah, this was many of her images have really captivated me, but I loved thinking through the process of this one. And so for those of you sitting in the audience, this is actually 3D pieces. Donna will, well, I think talk about them, that she printed these out and these hanging galleries, but then you're seeing the virtual visual of this. And so as I've already described, our project is exploring how microbes and termites as decayers and the wood that they decay itself change along a rainfall gradient, right? And so you're going to see shortly three of these frames, and each of these frames represents the wood, the termites, and the microbes in our system, and how they change along that rainfall gradient. So you'll see them swirling, so literally turning over along their rainfall gradient. The other thing is that each of these frames is also showing turnover. So this one especially these are termite images that my former student Becca took. And at the top, you see the wet site with the fewer termites. And then at the bottom, you see this dense array of termites. And this is at the dry sites where we had more termite species. And so it's literally a graph of that turnover of the termites along the gradient. So it really represents our science with that turnover of the organisms along the gradient and through time and with moisture. I also love how Donna makes us think with this about what is beautiful. And so in the original days, and I still cling to this, she called it mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And so making us think about, challenging our expectations about what's beautiful. So these are gilded frames, so precious, gilded, gorgeous frames that are built of termites and microbes and decaying wood, which usually you associate with kind of this negative. If you're not the four of us, you associate with this negative feeling. We love them, but hopefully you also walk away with this sense of wonder and beauty of what these organisms are by looking at them with these frames. So that's why I really love this work.
Thank you, Amy. And so if we can move on to the next slide now, Mark, and play the video of Decadence. So yeah, look, what you've picked up there in that beauty, one of my very first discussions I had with Amy about the project, we were talking about, she kept referring to them as players, in the carbon cycle. And then of course I was thinking of myself as a player within the carbon cycle. And also, this idea of methane release and CO2 release. And, this is what the project's really trying to measure some of these things. And I really started to think, oh my goodness, I think people already have this negative reaction to termites. How do I make them beautiful? So from your perspective, Amy, how do you think that a work like this adds to the conversation around climate change?
Yeah, great question, Donna. So I think, anthropogenic disturbance has local to global impacts that feed into the climate crisis. This is the globe's single biggest challenge is thinking about where we are with global change. And so we have local urbanization and species loss due to global greenhouse gas emissions. These are really critical to convey as concepts, but scientists aren't always listened to. And so what's great about this is that Donna is capturing how carbon is being emitted and how it's changing by these different players with carbon cycling. So this is a natural process that we're showing. We're working at all natural sites, but it has implications at global scales. And so I think it's highlighting their beauty as well as their vulnerability to the disturbance. And so we all end up with these visceral reactions to these images that Donna's portraying across her different works. And so it's wonderful having these new conduits to see in these different formats to what I typically represent as a scientist so that we can learn about the climate crisis.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Amy. And I think too that this work, although we're seeing it in a virtual format as a single channel, this is shown in a gallery in real life, is a 3-channel video installation where the frames are actually on the wall. And when you do walk up to view these works, you do see your own reflection within the works. Hence why we originally kind of thought of the idea of mirror, mirror. But again, from my perspective of seeing, what's my role in the carbon cycle, this is it really inviting the viewer to put themselves and to change the hierarchical level of normally these organisms are perhaps in the ground and unseen, and here they are at face height, and I am mirrored within over the top of those organisms. So for me, yeah, it was a way of sort of going, look, you know, every system that's happening within the environment is an important system. Let's try and understand. Let's try and understand that, and let's try and not always think that the human is perhaps at the top of the chain. So thank you for that, Amy. So this work was a real collaborative work, because in each frame I was really dealing with a different team of scientists. So we've got the termite frame, which is to the left, we've got the microbe frame to the right. And so I was dealing with different teams and different researchers in each particular aspect, whether it was data collection, data analysis, the actual field, or the lab collection or research. So this all happened, this project, right in the middle of our project, we had obviously had a pandemic. So how did we, I suppose we'll go to Steve and say, Steve, when COVID happened, we had to pivot, and we decided to do a series of virtual residencies rather than meeting in person. Do you want to talk a bit through the process of the virtual residency with your team, the Allison Lab?
Sure. So what we did was to set up basically weekly meetings for about a quarter, 8 or 10 weeks. And, as scientists, we typically have weekly meetings to discuss our science projects anyway. So we set up a separate meeting and hosted Donna for those discussions. And I think this is really where the action happened, and where we really gelled as a team. Because my graduate students got into it. A lot of the students are curious about these ideas of integrating art and science. So they were very into it. And my team is pretty interdisciplinary in and of itself. So we have folks working on the mathematical models, computer models, and we have people working in the lab on the assays, and bringing them together in this context with, somebody working on art was a real opportunity for them to see, how we could all come together and kind of find some common ground. And every week we kind of have a discussion, and oftentimes Donna might bring a work in progress and kind of get some feedback from us, or we would present some ideas or discuss what we're working on, and Donna would provide feedback on that or ask questions about that, like Amy was saying earlier. And so it became so that we had this rapport where we're each kind of mutually contributing to the discussion of art and of science. And it was a lot more even in the conversation than I might have expected, right? Donna was asking really great scientific questions, I think, and my team was asking, I think, really good questions about the art. And it was really, it felt like a very familiar process as somebody who's like involved in knowledge creation, that we were working together as partners in creating that knowledge for art and for science.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And Mark, can I get you to flick onto the next slide? Yeah, that's right. It really was a collaborative, a true collaborative process. And it was really great of, through those meetings, it was building those relationships, which allowed us to feel really comfortable expressing, things that we're not necessarily, so myself discussing the science is not necessarily a comfortable area for me, and your team, sort of reflecting when I was asking those questions. So tell me your reactions was absolutely, really cool experience. Can I get you to move on to the next slide, Mark? Here are just some of the comments that we had back from some of the team that we worked with, which I think was really interesting. And I will just read out this top one with Abby, one of the researchers that we were working with, and she sort of says, look, although my questions were challenging, they facilitated consideration of where does this research actually fit into the bigger picture, and what is the bigger picture, and who cares about the bigger picture. And I really like that reflection, because it kind of, when I hear those comments about the art that I create, yeah, it really makes me sort of think, okay, oh, that's good, I'm on the right track. So it sort of justified, yeah, both of our thinking, which was really engaging. So we might move on to the next slide. I know we're running close to time, guys. So here, if we can go to Amy. So what do you think sort of makes a productive or creative or successful collaboration, and what is the yeah, what are the benefits of those collaborations, Amy?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of elements. I mean, this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. So I have this, my sample size as a scientist, as I'd say, of 1. But I think to me, what this really represented, you know, we went in with mutual respect and appreciation for one another and what we did. And so I was just blown away by Donna's initial work. And we had and then we met and we started discussing, and it was just, and this, and this, and this. And we had such great dynamic between us about her art and my science and thinking about the questions. And so that, you know, I think that there was that mutual respect and appreciation. I think the other is not just feeling that the partner's a leverage point to get to where you want to go with something. And that can be, I think, but from the science side or from the art side. And so the other co-PI on our project is Paul Eggleton, who's a termite expert based in the Natural History Museum of London. And he talked about how the London History Museum is constantly having exhibits put on. So an artist will come in, ask him a few questions, and then put together a display. And he hasn't had those interactions, that back and forth that we've had, that it's not just, okay, let me talk to a scientist and then I'll make an artwork. It's really that the co-creation of the science and the art that we've had that I think has worked really, really well with this. And I think in part why that worked is that Donna came on right at the start of the project. You know, we were setting it up right at the beginning in 2018, which is when I started talking to her. So having the person embedded early in the process so that the collaborations can help in how both the science and the art evolve. And I think we saw that here. So that's what, for me, sort of crystallized and worked well. I don't know what Donna and Steve would say to this, but I would encourage others who are thinking of this to kind of keep those things in mind as these are project partners, not just somebody to step your science or your art further.
Thanks, Amy. Can we move on to the next slide, Mark, and then quickly on to the next one, and we might go to the very last question we'll throw over to Steve. So what was any surprising results, Steve?
Well, I think, you know, going back to what Amy was just saying about the co-creation of knowledge, I mean, I think it was just a really rewarding and fulfilling outcome to see that we could co-create knowledge, and that, you know, that Donna did that through artwork, and we were doing that through science, and then we were kind of co-creating at this interface and, you know, developing products. You know, so we have our scientific papers, we have our talks, we have the art exhibitions, and that they're all reaching, you know, different contingents of the planet, right? The planet that we all care about. And, you know, it's just really gratifying to see that, you know, there are intellectuals in art and science and social science, humanities, you know, we're all creative in our own ways and all generating products that have this really important relevance to society. And so I think that was, it was, I guess, surprising that we achieved that level, because I've never done that before in any science project, to be honest. So yeah. I thank you for that, Donna and Amy, for setting up this collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me into it. I think on this last slide too, it was one of the really fun things. And again, through that, being invested very early in the project and building the relationship between all of the people involved, and coming up with this idea. The whole team come up with this idea that we should have a card game, and one of our team members came up with this great name, Let's Rot. And so we were developing this card game virtually. And then when we recently met in June this year up in the Daintree in far north Queensland, Australia, we actually all got to play the card game, which was really great, from going from this, all these virtual connections to be sitting around a table, laughing, giggling, playing this game, making iterations. So it is coming soon, everybody. And you can see the little photo of us all playing around the table there, our R&D phase. So this was just a real, and lovely, surprising and beautiful result as well. So everyone keep your eye out for that. Look, thank you so much, Steve and Amy, for your conversation and discussion. We might go straight over to Mark now to have a bit of a look through the virtual gallery.
Thank you, everyone. So what I'll do quickly is I'm going to switch sharing screens and give you all a taste of this virtual gallery. It basically serves for us as a repository of so much of what was just discussed. This is just meant to give you a sense of how to navigate it and some of the information you could find here. I have to switch screens. So are you guys seeing the Lowe website now? Great. So if you go to the Lowe website, and if you even are on our homepage and you just click on digital engagement, the first option here, the virtual exhibition, decompose, there's an option to read 2 fascinating essays here that are also tied to the research in the project. But if you click here, we created this piece in Art Steps, which is a free platform to create virtual gallery spaces. So you can access this. Just give it a second to load. I am not going to make this full screen because for some reason when I do that, it stops me from sharing. And while I'm showing you this, I just encourage you all to use a Q&A for questions, because I'm just going to show this briefly and then we'll go to Q&A. So when you're in here, there are different ways to navigate. You can use these arrows on the bottom, which are some of the easiest. But when you come to this page, you want to click on the door to open it, and then you can start to go to the guide points. This gives an overview of the project and the exhibition and the work that Donna's created working with her team and obviously with Amy and Stephen. And so as we kind of wander around the space, you have access to click on essays. You can click on the videos. This is one of the videos we just saw on the presentation, so I won't click on that one in particular. This is another one as well. So these pieces here, we did have a challenge with this platform in terms of its resolution. And so Donna created, when you click on these kind of higher resolution walkthroughs of these digital works that have you get a better sense of what's going on in them. So you can click on any of this kind of interactive information. If you click on the image itself, you get text information based on the work, and you can kind of continue to just explore the gallery. Again, you can freely move yourself around as well, but we have found that this is somewhat of an easier way to go. Can get you a little dizzy. Donna, is there anything you want me to click on in particular? Or?
Can you just go to the next guide point?
Yes.
The next one, we might go to patterns of decay and just play the little video there. So this is, just an idea of zooming in on the artworks. So just be sure all of these are viewable to get some closer details. This is a great work of some of the decayed timber blocks that the microbes and termites had been munching away on, obviously artistically re-represented, but the imagery is made up from the actual timber blocks on site during our last field visit up in the Daintree, and you can see these amazingly beautiful patterns of these timber blocks which were placed out in the sites, and how they were being consumed by some of these organisms. Quite beautiful. That's probably all it from me, but I think definitely, like you said, Mark, that one of the easiest ways to navigate through this is to just keep hitting that next guide point, navigation bar
Great. So again, anyone, if you go to our digital engagement page, you can access this digital exhibition. I'm just going to go back to our presentation. And so we're going to move to Q&A. One question right now is this only virtual, or is that the Lowe 2? Unfortunately, this is, well, it's not unfortunate, but it is only virtual, which is great because it enhances and increases access. We just didn't have the space during this time. We're at the Lowe, we currently have 3 exhibitions opening in the next month, but this will be up on our digital engagement page for a prolonged period of time. I don't have any other questions in the Q&A, but I was curious, Donna. Well, one, I just want to thank you all for the project because I think it's fantastic and fascinating. And I love this intersection of science and art, but also the idea that it can be used as an advocacy tool for better understanding the environment, nature, our relationship with it, but also this kind of reciprocal relationship that exists with decay. I myself am a practicing artist and I have a bit of a dark aesthetic. So I also really appreciate finding beauty in things that, you know, people may at first reaction think are not beautiful. And I love that kind of antithetical thing that can happen. There's a really interesting friction or conflict. So really appreciate that. Before I go to my question, some did just pop up. So someone's asking if we have a science art documentary project, how can we submit it to the Lowe Museum? Well, just contact me direct. You can get my contact information is on the website under contact. And there's a generic email for digitallowe@miami.edu. So feel free to contact me directly. Again, I mentioned this in the beginning. All of this started with an informal conversation that I had. And it just grew and came to this. And let's see, so there's a question or a comment here. Amy, you spoke of the broader impacts of your work as part of the NSF grant. You also mentioned a graduate student. I'm curious about the direct outcomes, perhaps on students of your project in your lab and Dr. Allison's.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and Tracy, thank you. So I should say that Tracy is the SRO, the Sponsored Research Officer for the NSF grant, and has been intimately involved in making sure that all the people get paid to do the things. And so I wanted to make sure that she had the opportunity to see this exhibit that she helped to make come to life too at Miami. So thank you, Tracy. Donna showed the picture of Abby Yasko in the lab, or her question that she'd asked. So she's the grad student who's been a big part of this project. She's just actually been in far north Queensland in the Iron Range, harvesting trees and looking inside them to see how much decay has happened on them. To them. So I think there's a couple of things that were really inspiring. One of this was that we, as we said, took this project across COVID. And so everybody was stuck at home and really struggling. And so, you know, each of us were trying to encourage our teams to keep their spirits up, to keep their science going, to, you know, check in on their mental health, all of these sorts of things are really a challenge. And so what was a delight with this was that Donna became, in my mind, a real glue across our labs. And so she, by meeting with these virtual residencies or meeting to develop the card game, they were meeting monthly for the card game. And so students that were in Australia, in California, and Miami were all meeting online together. And so they were forming this community. So Donna helped to create a community and these interchanges in a time when a lot of us are really struggling to form a community. So I think that that was a real benefit that was pretty COVID specific, but I think that's continuing to today. And the other is that you know, I think about science communication, you know, we've tried a few different ways for this, but this gave the students these visuals, this very different way to communicate science to others. And so I've seen across Steve's lab and my lab, a lot of discussions of how important science communication is and where they would like to take this. So my student is, Abby, has been taking a course on interactive infographic video, you know, digital displaying of information, and really pushing the boundaries of how she's portraying her information, her science. And I think that that's really due to Donna and her influence on the lab, and seeing the importance, I think, that Steve and I and Paul put on these collaborations. I don't know, Steve, if you'd add anything to that.
No, I think you hit it, Amy. Really, that building community was a nice benefit. And I think, you know, it was partly COVID specific, but also more general too, because it, you know, the art and the practice of art and the way of knowing about art is something that I think all of our students rallied around and got really excited about. I was going to maybe answer the next question. Oh,
Go right ahead.
There's one about, you know, balancing the science and kind of the depiction of the science and the art process. And I wanted to comment on that because, you know, we had those conversations with Donna and with our groups, you know, like, well, what's being represented here? Is this scientifically accurate, or what, you know, how does the art speak? And I think that was one of the things that I learned is that, you know, we each have our creative process and they're equally valid. And, you know, it was more, you know, when we'd ask a question, what does this mean? Is this supposed to represent the science with some fidelity? And Donna would say, well, this is, you know, this is how I view it. And, you know, you can interpret that in various different ways. And I thought that was really interesting because it's actually the same for the science as well. You get the data and you can interpret it in various different ways. And there is some subjectivity there. So it's like, let the data speak, let the art speak, you know, both of those things are important. And, you know, it's really a balance of respecting each other's perspective and creative process.
Great, thank you. So there's a comment here that I can share, and we're about to close, but to address the topic of interactions of art and science, there have been teachers who would encourage their students to study origami structures as they seek to find models that enhance the physical science of flight. Decades later, pharmaceuticals and such are looking for models of proteins and their molecular folding possibilities. The discovery of new synthesized proteins may enhance our quality of health and life. Such paper folding artists were necessary as there did not exist a computer program to create three-dimensional structures until quite recently. Who knew that an adolescent study of paper folding would cure diseases and save lives? So just a lovely observation, right, of interdisciplinary approach to learning and growth. So thank you for sharing that. Does any of the panel have any last comments? We're at our last minute. If anyone had anything to close with.
Well, if I could just follow up on that last comment, you know, I think from this experience, I would say who knew that there'd be, you know, thousands of people coming and getting excited about this project on wood decay because of Donna's artwork and her creative process. So I think that's a really powerful statement. Like, it's impressive. Like, it's looking at her exhibition is far more impressive than reading any of my scientific papers, right? It's just the creative product is really, really top notch and engaging. And yeah, like I said, I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity. And I hope it can continue, you know, as we continue this project and hopefully start ones in the future.
Oh, thank you, Steve. That was that's really lovely, and it also comes back to that idea of there's many ways to tell a story, and you know, I think that everything just works so beautifully, and certainly all of the work that I've done with the entire team does make it easier for me to read the papers and understand the papers, with that imagery that I've been able to work through. So thank you, Steve and Amy, for coming along today. And yeah, thank you for inviting me on the project. And there's absolutely way more work that we're going to be doing together for sure.
Great. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll just add really quickly, Mark, that I think there's a famous Australian song that goes, "Where from little things, big things grow." And I think that this project itself began, Steve and I met, I don't know, like 15 years ago, or I can't remember when it was, but from little bits where we tried, and it grew from there. Bumping into Donna to have this little conversation, sitting down next to Mark right as I started at University of Miami at the first in-person, trying to get new faculty engaged with the university and having these casual conversations. And so I think you see how we're reaching different audiences and being able to tell different stories. And I think being open to finding little things and giving them the life to let them grow, I think has been a magical part of this project. So thanks to all of you.
Great. Well, thank you, Donna, Amy, and Stephen. It's been such a pleasure to work together, and I feel gifted that you worked and collaborated with the Lowe and brought your work to us and to our audience. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Please remember, if you have the time, to fill out the survey, and do check out our events. And remember, we have an opening tomorrow night and an opening next week. So we hope you join us. I hope everyone has a great evening, and thank you.